Okay, so you may be wondering why I'm not giving Grayson Mann a formal introduction. That is coming in a few minutes through the power of editing because Grayson, we figured it's the middle of August. We can talk about Clemson a week before this episode's set to come out, but not in the year of our Lord 2026 because this is the summer of 5 and 5 and a lot of what we talked about still perfectly relevant, but now we need to give the caveat and go back in time and tell people that it looks like Dylan Hunter is coming back to Clemson.
Yeah, there were some rumblings throughout the offseason that this could be a possibility. And Tyler, as time progressed, I thought, I don't know how this is going to work out. And now, as you and I had expressed over text, that shoot, we got to have a little bit of a different framework for this episode. And I think a lot of the stuff that we said earlier is still relevant, and we can get into Dylan Hunter's role in a second. But it is interesting to see how this changes now that you've got a little bit more of a veteran presence in that backcourt with Dylan Hunter. And honestly, Tyler, once NFL players started coming back to college, I got nervous that we were going to have to change something up.
I mean, had we gone to a question six, I did have it in the back of my mind. What happens if Dylan Hunter comes back? But, trying to keep this to not an hour long segment. And so some things you end up leaving off. And he was in the transfer portal, which he had not done back in the spring. And when the 5 and 5 rulings started coming down, he entered in. And so I kind of looked at it and figured, well, this isn't going to happen. He'll move on. And I mean, maybe Clemson could find a replacement, but we wouldn't be able to name that guy. And we should note the caveat that this is still ever changing in the courts, and he may never actually play for Clemson again. But at this point, I guess it's well over an 80-90% chance. And he did commit to return. And I think about the conversation we had coming up about Ace Buckner and Zach Foster and the young guards on this team. And I think it still stands that Clemson absolutely needs one of those three young studs to become a star. But what Dylan Hunter coming back does is gives them the insurance of knowing they have their number two. And so if Zach Foster can't be healthy, if they don't get a big contribution from one of the freshmen, if Ace Buckner turns out to just be a flash in the pan from February, they can afford for one of those players to just kind of frankly fall out of the rotation.
I think it certainly gives Zach Foster some time. Let's just use the caveat that he's coming back. And he's been working with the team to an extent in just a practice role and just been around in the sense that he kind of expected there was an opportunity for him to come back. And in the case of Godfrey, the pricing was never going to work out. But for Hunter, who, as far as I'm aware, is going to be more of a reserve guy and not going to be the focal point like he was last year, it gives Clemson, as you said, I think insurance is the perfect word to describe him coming back. Is he can be a guy that brings experience off the bench. He can be a guy that can mentor a young Harris Reynolds, an ever-growing Zach Foster as a player, Ace Buckner as a younger player as well that's still growing into his own. So it adds a position where I think, based off of our last conversation, you reach the conclusion that Clemson's backcourt is going to be a strength if that talent pans out. And now you have a veteran who's going into his fifth year that can be a little bit more of a stabilizer for a younger team for Clemson. And I think if you're Brad Brownell, you got to be very enthused with how this worked out, where it's not too late before the season starts and someone that's very familiar already with the program that doesn't have to spend the next 6 weeks catching up to speed.
It's also, and this is one of the touchy feely pieces of all of this that I think is going to be quite important when we get into the season. These guys have been working out all summer. You've been fighting for your roles, and for a coach to go out into the market and go and try to hunt down a high quality player is honestly, in a lot of ways, a testament to non belief in the guys who are already in the building. The Dylan Hunter situation does feel different because this is a guy who's been at Clemson for 4 years. It's an easy, if you're Brad Brownell, you just call him and say, hey, do you want to come back? He knows everyone in the building, and he's kind of a quintessential just plug him in and he will adapt to what's going on around him. I feel like it's completely different if all of a sudden some 15-point scorer from Wofford is now coming in. That's a sign that the coaching staff probably doesn't believe in the young guards, but Dylan Hunter is almost like a free pass of, hey, we know you. He knows Foster and Buckner well at this point. He can slide right back into that rotation. And I would hope that this is the kind of move that shouldn't be a chemistry disruptor.
Yeah, you look at it around the country, Tyler, and I find that story of there's so many different players and rosters that, as you said, have been going through the spring and the summer, working out and grinding out positions and minutes. And for some of these programs, they're bringing in a guy they hope can be that ultra difference maker and sort of disrupt some of the chemistry. Not necessarily in Clemson's case, where Hunter's not going to be asked to carry a lot of the offensive burden. He's going to simply be there as a veteran presence that can get the offense moving off the bench. And that works perfectly in Brownell's favor in that sense. So, yeah, I think it's not like LSU either, where you're bringing in like an NFL guy who hasn't been in the workouts at all and has been in an entirely different league. It's someone that you're familiar with within the program. So there's not going to be any feathers ruffled for bringing in a guy like Dylan, who has always been synonymous with just glue guy and chemistry. And so I think this is a move that's going to work out very well for Clemson in the long run in terms of its depth moving forward.
So we close out this conversation talking about expectations and how realistic NCAA tournament is for this team. And I'll leave that in there because I think it's still a fascinating discussion, but I do feel like we need to amend it here a bit because I was thinking about Clemson as a team where you probably needed a lot more things to go right than go wrong to make it into the NCAA tournament with this young backcourt, with these bigs who are unproven at this league. But now you toss Hunter in, and it erases a fair few of my questions about this Tigers defense with him at the head of the perimeter attack on that end of the court now. And just having him around, I start to think of Clemson as a team that's baseline is probably somewhere right around that NCAA tournament bubble, where if the young guards turn out to be terrific, if they get some all defensive level production from the front court, then this should be a team that can coast into a 7-8 seed, maybe a 9 once again. And even if Zach Foster can't get back healthy, if, say, David Fuchs can't adapt to the ACC, then they still may be able to squeak their way into the tournament if just a couple of lucky bounces go their way.
Right, and we had talked about this in the podcast, so I don't want to totally spoil my answer as to the tournament expectations, but to simplify it here, and then I guess past me, but in the future, when you're listening to this, we'll expand upon it, is Brownell did a lot with less last year, and it feels like talent-wise, if it all works out, theoretically he's got more to work with, and Hunter more or less is a stabilizing force in a backcourt that probably had some questions as to what the ceiling was. So I do feel better about my assessment of this team. I do think it's a tournament team. I don't know seeding wise where they land yet. I think a lot of that has to do with how the ACC shakes up, whether the league is stronger or weaker compared to last winter. So there's a lot of moving parts still, but I think that this Hunter move only solidifies my opinion that Clemson can make it 4 for 4 in the last 4 seasons under Brownell going to the tournament.
All right, we'll talk about that and more. It'll be a couple of seconds of pause, and then we are going to go back in time about a week to mine and Grayson's original conversation. We're going to get really deep into the rest of this Clemson roster. But remember now, Dylan Hunter, all indications it appears will be returning to the Tigers. It is time to talk off-season Clemson Tigers here. And joining me, as always, to cover that, it is Grayson Mann of ClemsonTigerNet. Grayson, thank you for hopping on.
Yeah, I'm so entrenched in football mode. We had a little gaff beforehand on whether it was a football or basketball deal, but I'm happy to talk some hoops, man. Brad Brownell, it's getting a little bit more relevant year by year.
Yeah, you're confused. Ian Shefflin was apparently confused last year. If I remember correctly, that never really went anywhere, his little foray into football. But it is a reloaded Clemson roster here, although we do have a couple of familiar faces. And all of the young guards are back. Carter Welling's back, although it seems pretty unlikely at this point that he will be able to play at all next season. But I just got 5 major questions here to run through with you, the Clemson expert. And kicking off with number 1, has Brad Brunell maybe found his secret formula to operating in this transfer portal landscape? Because you look at these last 5 years and what he has done well, this roster really reflects it. And that's develop young guards, turn them into better players year over year, and manage to get them to stay. And then just evaluating veteran big man talent in the portal. Those have been the strengths of these good Clemson teams over the past couple of years. And this year, he really just leaned into basically those 2 pillars.
Yeah, I think when you look at Brownell's recent success, a lot of that has been, as you define it, with the Gerard and Jaden Zachary additions being the portal guard spots, I guess. But yeah, very big men centric. RJ Godfrey last year from Georgia. That one always feels weird calling that a transfer portal addition when
He
he
still
was
had
a
to want to take him back, so
yeah. And then you have Victor Locken a few years ago. So there's a certain way that Brownell has developed his roster. And so this year it's interesting because it feels like last year the guard play was probably the weakness of the team, and you really funneled everything by the post when you couldn't really shoot at times. And now you have an Ace Buckner who's got a year under his belt, a Zach Foster who's recovering from a torn ACL, but should be ready by the start of the season. And you add Notre Dame's Cole Serta, and all that paired with a few additions here, like Dylan Faulkner from Sanford, got Fuchs from San Francisco. There's a couple pieces here that really, Tyler, get me excited if I'm a Clemson fan about what this makeup could potentially look like with Brownell trying to get to his 4th straight tournament appearance, which has not been done in Clemson history.
Yeah, and 2 names that you didn't mention in terms of the old guards. I mean, Justin Porter, Butter Johnson last year, just they were both fine. It just kind of felt like those were spots where you could have potentially done better in the portal. I think he was trying to stray away from that like veteran lead guard who was never really a star. And Serta, I just don't even bring into this equation because that's a guy that anyone should have wanted. You just plug him into any decent or better offense and just put him in spots where he can run around and shoot open threes. And I mean, what else could you really ask that guy to have to do?
Yeah, and I asked Brownell about him. We had a chance to speak with him privately about around June, so the roster was a little bit finalized by then. I think they were signing the paperwork for Fuchs. And one of the questions that I asked him was, is the Gerard comparison a little lazy, or are there some similarities there? Did you maybe recruit Serta on that? Or you bring in a guy that's a 3-point specialist from an ACC school? I bring that with Notre Dame. And he said, yeah, I mean, there's some similarities there, but you got a little bit of a bigger kid, much more willing and capable defender. So you have someone that is sort of that Gerard build that took a ton of shots last year, great at creating, especially around the arc. So there's that as well. And you had mentioned a lot of schools wanted him, and Clemson was able to not necessarily outbid certain programs, but there's the track record that Brownell's established that you had mentioned at the top of your question about the portal. Is Clemson's built a formula here that's been very attractive nationwide.
So pivoting into, I guess I'll jump ahead here in my order. I'll make this my new question too, because you look at that revamped front court now. Dylan Faulkner and David Fuchs, really looking specifically at them. Faulkner coming in from Sanford, first team all SoCon, all defensive team in that league. David Fuchs had a really kind of a breakout year at San Francisco, probably more of an offensive threat. He's kind of a more old school, do-it-all guy, great rebounder, can do some low post scoring, but not someone who's going to wow you with their prowess from either beyond the arc or defending the rim. So just looking at Victor Locken 2 years ago, Carter Welling this year, can Dylan Faulkner and David Fuchs form the core of a maybe not elite, but top 5, top 6 ACC defense?
Yeah, I think that's the goal, right? Especially since Carter Welling won't be likely in action this year, and the timing's rather unfortunate with how he went down by the course of the end of the season in that ACC tournament game against Wake Forest. So you kind of have an awkward spot there where your best player is going to be sitting on the bench for a majority of the year. And so you're going to rely on a guy like David Fuchs. You're going to rely on, we call him LT around here, is the TCU transfer that's got a name that I cannot pronounce yet.
Lillavicious.
Yes, this is why we come onto the Basketball Ball Knowers podcast, Tyler.
Well, this is where it just helps that TCU played Duke, and I talked to some TCU people in March.
Yeah, that was a fun one, wasn't it? But yeah, I think that Faulkner kind of reminds me of Godfrey in that sense, where it's going to be a lot of stuff by the post. It's sort of your blue-collar front court, to be completely frank with you, between him and Fuchs, where I don't think you're going to see either of them take 5 threes a night, but defensively kind of have the ingredients there under Brownell, where he's taken some maybe average defenders and made them into more capable players there on that side of the ball. So I think you got a chance there. Is it the same like last year where maybe you have a size issue? I think that's yet to be seen. I think Clemson did even with Carter Welling and RJ Godfrey. They got punched around a little bit, particularly in that game against Iowa. There were plenty of sequences where they just got smoked on the glass, and that ended up costing them in that tournament game, besides a poor offensive shooting night. But this is a group that I think is exciting, but I kind of want to see it first in ACC play, at least in the front court.
So one thing we should note, because of the recent 5-for-5 rule change, Welling's last year of eligibility is going to be the 27-28 season, no matter what happens this year. So for anyone who wasn't keeping up, red shirts are now gone. And so it does add an interesting little wild card in that if Welling could say be ready on, February 15th, then it actually does them no good to hold him out the rest of the year. And I can't possibly see a scenario where this is a 25-minute-a-game anchor of their defense again, but someone who come ACC potential NCAA tournament time could just be playing 12 minutes is at least possible now because of this little red shirts change.
I do think that, and I think that's a great point. I do think that opens up the door to where, and again, we had talked to Brad about this, is that this was before the 5-for-5 ruling. It was going to be a great challenge because they had to decide, I think by this time, if they were going to medically redshirt him. And I think Brownell was optimistic that maybe you could get him back by February in a limited role. It just depended on how he attacked his rehab, and all indications are is that he has very well. But again, a lot of time between now and a potential return date. I do think that 5-for-5 rule gives Clemson some flexibility to where, what a boost would that be? Even if it was for 12 minutes a night, where just to have some extra front court depth, Carter Welling is an 8th option in the postseason. That could prove to be pretty dangerous for Clemson.
So question number 3, that young backcourt. We mentioned Zach Foster, Ace Buckner, they're coming back. You are one of the great landowners over in Foster Falls.
I am.
Of course, the torn ACL really just putting a dent after what was 4 or 5 just spectacular games last year. Seemed like he was coming on, was going to potentially be the best guard on that team going down the stretch. They lose him in December. But for this team to be successful, it's pretty clear that one of these two is going to have to take that star jump. The Chase, maybe not quite full Chase Hunter level of 2 years ago, but can you fill out a Chase Hunter role? Can you fill out that Gerard role? They're going to need it out of one of them. Do you see that coming from either Foster or Buckner this season?
Yeah, so there's a new name that I think I'm going to start acquiring some real estate with, and that's going to be Harris Reynolds, is the freshman guard that Clemson signed for the 2026 class. He's a 4-star out of Atlanta. Another kid that, from all indications from the early workouts and the trip from Italy, is this a kid that can contribute immediately? I think Clemson's backcourt with guys like Ace Buckner, Zach Foster, and now you add this Harris Reynolds kid in there. Tyler, I think this by February potentially has the chance to be one of the more formidable backcourts in the ACC. I think a lot of that's predicated on how Foster looks post ACL. See if that springiness and athleticism that you saw early in that stretch that you mentioned, where you think, man, this is just a superb athlete, just kind of has to put it all together. And then, of course, he tears his ACL and sort of it stops and drags that potential out there. So I do think that it's Foster dependent, but this is a group that, by all indications, based on people that I'm talking to in the building and a few other basketball sources, they think Harris Reynolds is legit and Clemson's got a superstar if that projection works out.
So this does kind of take from my question number 4 here, but I do want to go deeper into Reynolds then. Like, just what should we expect? Because I'm not someone who digs into much in the way of high school tape at all. Like, what kind of role could this guy fill? What next to Foster, next to Buckner, either guy? What are we looking for?
Yeah, I think he probably is coming off the bench early and someone that is maybe going to be like a sixth man type of thing where I think Foster and Buckner are going to be your 1-2 punch early on. But I do think this is someone that's a capable shooter. He's a very willing passer, and Brownell described it to us as just this, like Foster, he's really just ahead of the curve athletically. And so you bring him on. And what's unique about Reynolds in this case, Tyler, is Foster and Buckner have both been out with injuries this summer. So they've really had to ramp it up for Reynolds because he's had to take a lot more of the volume per se than maybe he would have if had things been different. And it's been the best thing. He took a lot of command in this Italy trip, had multiple 20-point games. Someone that isn't afraid of the bright lights, but Brownell certainly developed a rapport there in that Atlanta pipeline. And so this is someone that I think, again, by all indications, is someone that's going to shine for Clemson, and it's going to be pretty soon instead of later.
Have we heard anything else on Foster, by the way? I know Brownell gave an update in June that he was on pace to be ready for opening day, but it's been a while now. So I don't know if you know something that the Google searches were not revealing.
I all indications that I have right now is that he'll be ready to go. I don't know what their ramp up period looks like for him, where it's, okay, in November he'll have this amount of minutes, and then December it'll be this amount of minutes. I think it's all dependent on him, and we'll speak to Brownell here in a few weeks before they get rolling into their true preseason. But by all indications, they brought Foster to Italy to kind of just keep getting him more assimilated into the offense, back into form. I think he was shooting and doing some working with five, but I don't think it was a 5-on-5 situation. So he's doing on-court work and is on pace. But as far as a season start, indications would tell me that he's going to be ready to go, but we haven't gotten that official confirmation yet.
So a modified question number 4 for you then, because Harris Reynolds would have been the answer, but you take out those 2 guards that we've been talking about, the 4 veteran transfers. This is a very, very young bench. Whole bunch of freshmen, couple guys. I mean, the most experienced is Chase Thompson, who scrapped together a couple of rotation minutes at the end of the season, but didn't play much the first 3.5 months at all. They're going to need 2, maybe 3 of those guys to contribute this year. So taking Reynolds out of that group, who else would you be high on? Not necessarily as a huge game changer, but hey, so-and-so could just be a really steady 7th man and just maybe give them something that this starting group is not going to have.
I think that's going to be Chase Thompson this year. I think that there were flashes in ACC play where you saw some of I think he's one of the more intelligent players on this roster, and Brownell had said it himself that this is a guy that just knew where to be from day one. So I don't think he goes out there and you're thinking, oh, he's going to have 12 and 6 a night. I think it's just going to be the way he sets things up for this group and is sort of the field general in almost a point forward sense, where that second unit could be commanded by him. And maybe not every night's going to be 12 and 6 a night, but it's going to be more of just Thompson made the right play every time, setting up his teammates for good shots. And so I think that's one of those players that I'm high on just from that standpoint. The other player, just to kind of give you a more compounded answer, is I think if Dallas Thomas can take another step, that's a guy that has a really unique body type. He's almost got the KD build where he's really thin, but has long arms and is a really good shooter. But Brownell has been pushing him to be more of a willing defender, and that's been sort of the fork in the road of what kind of player he's going to be. Is he someone that's going to come off the bench and maybe play you 10 minutes a night and you go, hey, that looks pretty good, but you're looking for a little more? Or is he a guy that's going to take that next leap in his career? I think that's a guy that if Clemson can get more out of, that changes their ceiling a little bit when we talk about where they'll stand in the ACC picture in a few months here.
Any other guys that you feel like we're missing on here? I mean, we didn't talk all that much about Lola Vicious. Just really a long guard coming in from TCU, guy who can rebound for his position. Maybe needs to defend down, but I guess can probably play the three. Nice shooter. And anything else I'm missing on there?
I think, yeah, you got it right there with LT, and he's going to be probably playing the three for Clemson, is my understanding. So, yeah, Clemson's front court, I think it's a lot of unproven potential there, just from how do some of these players that have had impacts, like Fuchs, for example, how is that going to look from San Francisco now to the ACC? Faulkner, how is he going from the G6 to the P4? I think Clemson's got the right pieces, but again, it's a younger roster. There's not that same leadership that you had. There's no carryovers from. I don't think there's any more players from Clemson's Elite Eight squad. So this is really a new era for Brownell in this group, and it's weird to think that was almost 4 years ago, to this time. So it's a different look for Brownell, but the same formula has worked so far, and we'll see if he can go 4 for 4 for tournament appearances here soon.
Yeah, I mean, Fuchs just seems like someone who should be just an awesome role player there, gobble up a bunch of rebounds. He does nothing spectacular, maybe kind of take like a poor man's Ian Shefflin type role. Faulkner, Lela Vicious, and then maybe if they can find another element for him in the offense, Serta will really be the potential ceiling changers. But you mentioned the fourth straight NCAA tournament appearance, and that takes me to question number 5, which is, I mean, I feel like this roster is going to tell us definitively, is this the year that Clemson comes back down to earth? Or is it the year that we learn that Brad Brownell has truly ascended from just the guy who can never get fired to a just like legitimately awesome coach?
I think we found that out last year. I wasn't incredibly high on last year's roster. Didn't really feel like it had the offensive punch to be as successful as his last 2 tournament teams before that. And again, they didn't have much success in the tournament, but they got to North Carolina, took them down in the quarterfinal, battled Duke to their own peril in the semifinal. But again, I think this is a coach that has sort of shed that old reputation of someone that just could never give Clemson that extra juice. And now it's a team that the expectation on campus, the expectation from national media is Clemson's going to be a tournament team, and Brownell is a large reason as to why. So if they miss the tournament this year and the expectation isn't met, there's going to be a ton of disappointment. And I think that's reflective of the program that Brownell has built. Is it going to go 4-4 again? I underestimated Clemson last year at my own peril, said they probably weren't going to make the tournament, and they won 24 games and surprised a lot of people here around Clemson. So I would say underestimate Brownell at your own peril at this point. I think Clemson is the program that it is right now, and it's a team that can make the tournament on a yearly basis.
I mean, you just look at this raw roster on paper, and it just doesn't look like an NCAA tournament team, but you see the easy pathways. Zach Foster, all-conference guy. Faulkner, all defense. Serta and Lela Vicious both shoot 40% from deep. And it's a lot of what-ifs, but at this point with Brownell, like, I think you start to feel some level of confidence that, oh, could he go 3 for 4 on those? Could he go 2 for 4? And then all of a sudden, Harris Reynolds is the best freshman in this league that's not going straight into the NBA lottery. Like, it really is the year that's going to decide whether or not I start giving him the Kyle Smith bump every single year in preseason predictions, where you figure out the standings and then you go back and just move Clemson up 3 spots because Brownell is there.
And he's done that, I think, the last several years as Clemson's been picked to finish middle of the pack, and they finished, I think last year they were picked to finish 8th, and they were, I think, 4th or 5th, if I'm not mistaken. So they just continue to exceed expectations. And I think fans have gotten to the point where the expectations have been met so thoroughly that it's, can we get to the tournament and win a few games now instead of just making the dance? Like, that's no longer good enough to where, I think, Tyler, if we had this conversation 3 or 4 years ago, there are Clemson fans that would have been fine with making the tournament every so often and just being relevant every other March. Now it's every March. They want a little something. They got a bigger appetite for basketball, and I think that's a large credit to Brownell.
Yeah, I mean, they do kind of get to grab a little bit of a freebie last year because the timing of that Welling injury, it just seemed like it took their
Yeah.
soul from them. And without him, they just kind of never had a chance from the jump against Iowa. But we shall see. It's going to be an interesting Clemson season. That's why we are talking about them here already in August. But Grayson, you'll be covering them every step of the way. You got plenty of football coverage on the way as well. I know people are starting to get excited for that. So where can all the good listeners find you?
Yeah, you can check us out at tigernet.com, or you can check out me and my co-host David's podcast, the Orange Crush podcast, on our YouTube page at ClemsonTigerNet, or you can follow me on Twitter at Gray_man21. I got a ton of stuff football related. We'll have some basketball stuff later in October when that gets rolling. Really, man, I'm excited to get back on and give you. We got to jump in when conference play starts. It'll be exciting.
Absolutely, and thank you for joining me.
Absolutely, man.
And thank you to everyone for listening. Be back again, one more episode in September, and then we will be getting hard into the preseason. So check out the show. Follow us at Up the Coast Pod on Twitter for all your updates on that.